Hello, it's Scott Manley here with episode 94 of Interstellar Quest. Our crew on Minimus are continuing their task of pillaging the moon for all the scientific secrets it might hold. Indeed, there is one last place they need to go. I believe this is the last place that we have to go. It is yet another flatlands. Honestly, I don't remember whether it's the greater flats, the lesser flats, the not so important flats, the hipster flats, or the Fonzie flats. It doesn't really matter at this point. It is one more biome which you can see here that when I was landing I had to make a bit of a course correction on account of the fact that the moon had rotated underneath me. Minimus is actually one of the faster rotating moons in the Kerbal system. It is not tidally locked to its parent body, unlike many of the other moons in the game. And indeed, the real solar system, which we know and love, has most of the moons locked into a tidally locked to their parent body. The only few exceptions that spring to mind are Elara and Himalaya, which are orbit Jupiter, and Phoebe and Hyperion, which orbit Saturn. EVE Online players might find those last two names familiar because the expansions are being named after mythical figures, and those are two of the recent expansions. Anyway, looks like we have an old report from the lesser flats. I could be bounded in a nutshell and count myself king of infinite space. Let me send that out. You note that landing on a perfectly flat surface is somewhat boring. Indeed, I've become something of an expert at that. And for reasons of brevity, I've curtailed much of the gallivanting around on the surface, but yes, I believe that's the last flag, and so this is the last science. It's just ice with the occasional snowflake. You think you could drill some holes in here and play golf. Space golf, of course. Anyway, since we've collected all the data from all the biomes on Minimus, at least as far as I can be bothered, it's time to send a spacecraft to return our crew to Kerbal. We have Sean Kerman here taking the newly redesigned planetary landing capable, it was originally called the John Patrick Mason, and keeping with the Sean Connery theme, it was suggested that the name Draco was appropriate. Draco is of course the name of the dragon from Dragonheart, which is voiced by Sean Connery. Anyway, I've added a couple of other features to this, but more importantly, it's just a really fast spacecraft for getting out to Minimus. At full thrust, it has something like 40 kilometers per second of delta V. At less thrust, it's going to have a lot more delta V due to the improved specific impulse. So I very aggressively set course for Minimus. I reckon I can get there in a couple of hours without trying too hard. The only thing is, he's already left and he has forgotten his golf clubs, which is unfortunate because the Highlander team doesn't have any golf clubs either, so we're just going to have to pass on the whole notion of space golf. But you know, playing golf in such a low gravity environment could lead to all sorts of problems like losing your balls. Space golf, of course, has a long and illustrious tradition. On Apollo 14, Alan Shepard took with him a golf head, which was designed to be screwed on to one of the tools so that he could hit a couple of golf balls on the moon. Now, because of the spacesuit, he wasn't able to hold it with both hands, but he was able to swing this makeshift club with one hand, and according to him, he hit the ball for miles and miles and miles. Many people like to think that's the longest drive in history, but honestly, he's the only one that knows. But he wouldn't have had to hit the ball that hard in the low gravity and the vacuum of the moon. I suppose when space tourism really gets going, we might have a space golf archaeologist go up there, find it, and verify whether it is the longest putt. Of course, technically, it'd be a lot easier to just go to the moon with a better golf club and break the record to avoid any further arguments on the subject. But that is all ignoring the fact that the longest golf drive in history actually took place from the International Space Station. Expedition 14, there was a promotional publicity stunt for a golf company in which an astronaut hit a golf ball from the edge of the space station, and since it went into orbit and stayed in orbit presumably for some time before coming back to Earth, it by definition became the longest golf drive in history. Again, the astronaut astronaut in question was forced to hit the ball with a club held in just one hand because of the bulky spacesuit. Anyway, Sean had made it to Minimus in about 2 hours 10 minutes. Unfortunately, he started firing his engines a little late because he actually had to cross into the sphere of influence of Minimus, and I missed it for that reason. Regardless, of course, at full thrust he was able to put the thing into orbit. The only thing is the time to periapse is going to be like 5 hours, so doing the usual thing of letting gravity bring you down isn't necessarily going to be the fastest when you have a ship which has such a staggering amounts of delta V available to it. So instead, we point the spacecraft at Minimus and we start thrusting downwards until the time to periapse gets down to a reasonable value so that we consider landing. It puts us back on a hyperbolic trajectory, but at least it's a hyperbolic trajectory back in the right direction. So probably one of the most inefficient orbital insertions I've ever done, but then again, with that amount of delta V, who cares? This engine is, of course, completely overpowered. People have pointed this out, but it is a late unlock that uses technology that on paper could exist. Anyway, I've added a couple of new items to this spacecraft because there's something else we want to do. So in the cargo bay of this, we have a couple of little probes here. I'm just going to detach them by setting up a staging group. I've deliberately turned myself at 90 degrees to my orbit. And there we go, the little probes are moving out. All they are is a tiny little probe body, fuel tank, engine, transmitter, couple of solar panels, and I'm not even sure that the space probe is facing the right direction. That's one thing that I need to do testing on here. It should be pretty obvious, and you know what? Yeah, I'm pointing it upwards and the nav ball is showing downwards, so I've got this thing backwards. So I need to figure out what way I want to point this thing. So these are designed to be impact probes. They are going to fire their engines and get themselves into the ground at great speeds. So I'm just going to move them apart away a little from the spacecraft. Just need to stage. Okay, well apparently staging doesn't work. Stage 0 does not want to respond. Well, activate the engine and off I go. That's one of them. He'll head off in his orbit. The other one, I shall find another orbit for. Let's turn this way. That is going forwards in the orbit, so it'll lift it up to a slightly higher orbit. And we'll turn this way and then fire the engine along there. So that will leave the spacecraft free and clear to navigate to its target. And the target will, of course, be in the general vicinity of the Highlander. We don't want to get too close, once again, because of the lethal levels of radiation radiating from that engine. And, well, turns out that if I want to get there, then I need to perform quite a hard plane change maneuver. Again, lots of delta V, so we don't care too much. So set that up and then decay my orbit, bring it down into this region. This time actually accounting for the rotation of the planet just a bit. This new improved Draco, of course, has reaction wheel systems installed to let it turn a little more nimbly than the original version we took to the surface. And with the revolutionary tail landing system, it will be quite capable of landing on its rear. No need to do some crazy low-pass landing skill kind of thing. We've put the landing gear in a position that will work with that rear-facing engine. This is actually much safer than the original way I did it, and less likely to result in the engine being destroyed by, say, clipping into the ground when we bounce off the surface. Sean is, of course, an expert at landing these things by now. And almost touched down. Excellent. You see, that was really simple. Now we can collect seismic data and test these seismic probes. So all I want to do is kind of point it. I could just fire it retrograde and let it fall, but this thing actually has about a, kilometer per second of delta V, but we all know the faster you go, the bigger the bang you make, and the more science you will get. Actually, I don't know if that's true in this case, but hey, bigger bangs mean more science. There's a battle cry for you. Bigger bangs, more science. Those shockwaves will make the planet ring and unlock its scientific seismic secrets. So over at the Highlander, we have a little seismic probe on the side here. What does it say? Collect impact data. We get 150. Oh, that's pretty good. Draco probe impacted into Minimus for more science. Let's do that again. We have two of them. So, of course, once again, we point it in the right place. And we'd like to land on the daytime side simply because it's nice to see the landscape. I point this down at about 45 degrees, which will depend upon what orbit you're in when you actually fire it. Obviously, it would be rather embarrassing to miss the moon completely. After all, if you do, you will pretty much go off into a hyperbolic orbit and escape. But this does a pretty good job, and bingo! 1600 meters per second this thing has, and it was still firing its engine. Not bad, if I do say so myself. And now it's Sean's turn to collect that science. We're leaning over just a little here, even in low gravity. But the science worked. We have collected more secrets, and we shall take that home and use it to tell us more about the nature of space-time and the warp drive so that we can unlock that technology. Anyway, with the one scientific goal of the mission completed, it's time to turn into a taxi driver. So, Sean Locke Kerman starts heading over. It's 20 kilometers out and he can fly over there in a few minutes. He could, of course, fly a ballistic arc, but he wants to show off his fancy flying. He's going to keep it low here so he can analyze the atmosphere. That's what he says. In reality, he really wants to show that he can just fly this thing like a pro. Perhaps trying to show that Sean Locke and Sean have more than just a few letters of their name in common. So yeah, at this point I thought, wouldn't it be fun to take a look outside of the capsule? And yeah, it's pretty nice to see from inside. Unfortunately, it would be nice if the rendering was better, but all the same, flying across the surface, I decided, why not try to do this whole thing from IVA? So this is what I did. This is me just more or less trying to fly this low across the surface. I don't have a thrust indicator, so I just have to kind of look at the rest of the instruments to guess how it is actually affecting my velocity vector. And the other problem is that if I look out, I can't always see the distance to the target. But anyway, I figure given the inherent dangers involved in such a procedure, it's time to bring in old me. Okay, engines cut. Let's see if we can find this target. I want to see how close I am. Oh, there it is there. Wow, I've actually come within about 500 meters. Now I just need to get myself a little bit closer. I'm certainly falling downwards. I'm about 300 meters up, so I guess I'm about 200 meters away as it is. Let's just use my let's use the nav ball here to reduce the lateral velocity. Horizontal speed is 10.987.654, slowing down quite a bit, down to less than 1 meters per second, and we practically stopped here in terms of vertical and horizontal speed. Where is the target that I'm looking for? This is where it gets to be fun. Horizontal speed is holding steady at 30 millimeters per second. But I think... Okay, I need to find this target again to figure out if I'm facing the right way. Dropping off, my lateral velocity is now 5 millimeters per second. That is actually pretty impressive. That's about 2 inches per second for those of you that don't speak metric. Oh, and there is the Draco. Wow. This is quite shockingly close considering how that I've just been flying this in IVA mode with very little in the way of instrumentation. I don't have any... I guess there's the rendezvous planner, but that would require me to actually click on the button while trying to fly this thing, and my fingers are all being put to use, pushing buttons and tweaking my orbit, or tweaking my trajectory. Okay, where is it? Once again... So I'm using the technique of trying to make my velocity vector towards the target, or remain pointing towards the target. I have deliberately picked up some horizontal speed, but now I'm slowing it down again, and we are beautifully close to this spacecraft. We're practically parking alongside the whole thing. 44 meters up, descending at 1 meter per second. Horizontal speed less than 1 millimeter per second. Can you believe that? That is ridiculously low. Okay, I don't think I'm going to maintain that. 2 millimeters per second. Come on, let's get this down. We're moving downwards at a couple of meters per second. 17, 16, 15, 14, 13, 12, 10, 9. I don't know where my landing gear is. Wonder when I'll hit. That feels like I've hit. Not bad. Got it within 50 meters, all through IVA. And we have a beautiful sunrise in the background. Well, that was one of my favourite pieces of flying I've ever had to do. Okay, look, you see, old me doesn't always mean that terrible things are about to happen. It just means that I want to show you the potentiality for terrible things happening. Anyway, 4 times regular speed. We have Sean and crew are going to start loading up taking the science and loading it up on the spaceplane. We'll put Sean and Locke together since they're both the seasoned pilots, whereas the other 2 will get to sit in the mobile lab. It'll be a little cramped because there's essentially only room for 4 crew and 2 of them are going to have to live in the laboratory. But they're only doing this for less than 24 hours, so it should be okay. And I'm betting there's more free room than perhaps in the Mercury capsule. I don't know if you've seen the Mercury capsule, but it was a spacecraft that you wore rather than you sat in. Anyway, with all the science transferred over, it's time to head back to Kerbal. We've got our target locked, and we head off at about 66% thrust, and then it's pretty much pointing straight at Kerbal for a little while, and then we'll make some adjustments to come in at the appropriate attitude. We don't just want to fall back down, we want to get back as fast as possible. So Mercury was that is the spacecraft I think that has the least amount of room of anything, other than the shuttle rescue balls that I mentioned in my ball video. And Gordon Cooper, he spent the longest time in one of those. He was in space for 36 hours, and there was practically no room to move. I don't know how going to the bathroom worked when you're in a spacesuit. I guess he just had a diaper or whatever. But yeah, he also encountered some serious problems, and the spacecraft lost automatic attitude control, so we had to start flying it by hand, manually essentially. He ended up apparently drawing markers on the windows, the tiny little windows of the Gemini capsule, so he could figure out his orientation relative to the stars. And he had John Glenn helping him on the ground, and he had his wristwatch to time the burn. Did a manual re-entry burn and managed to put the spacecraft down within 4 miles of the carrier that was supposed to pick him up. Anyway, one of the things I thought I would try for this was to try more or less a direct descent over the landing site. Now, I timed the return more or less to come down and hit periaps roughly at the same time as I was flying over the landing site. So what I'm going to do, and I'm going to have to split this over to the next episode, is I want to kill all of my hyperbolic velocity, and this is why I'm transferring fuel forward, because I'm originally thinking that I was going to dive down into the atmosphere. I want this thing to be stable as possible, and I start aggressively slowing down, aiming to bring myself down over the launch pad, and ideally I'll either land it like an aircraft or land it like a tail sitter. Either option would be interesting. You might also notice in the staging diagram I have a pair of parachutes. Those are unlikely to save the spacecraft from being, give it a soft touchdown, but they will probably be enough to save the crew from getting killed, even if the spacecraft is ruined on impact. Anyway, yeah, we're very aggressively going to slow down and come down straight over the landing site, but that will be in the next episode. Until then, I'm Scott Manley. Fly safe.